All right, man. So we were saying before, Scott Campbell, you've had like a pretty interesting career because you've gone through. You were at what caught my eye was that you were with Anglico, but you were an infantry officer before, and you did all this other stuff. So I'm interested to hear that aspect because when I was at first Anglico, having an infantry officer there wasn't a thing. That was like, I think that was earlier on in the Global War on Terror or something they tried out.
Yeah, I stood up second Anglico. So, and I was coming out of JSOC at the time, and I was kind of shocked because I'd commanded second force before as a major. That's a separate story we can get into later. But I thought I would go back to the reconnaissance community. I thought I'd go back to a force unit or a recon unit if I was going to get to command something. And when I hit the list, I was shocked that I got Anglico. And I was, I think, one of the few infantry officers to command Anglico. And it was the perfect timing with General Amos being at 2 MEF. It was, I got very fortunate.
Yeah, that's again, that's not for most people, or most people don't know, that's normally an artillery officer's job. Sometimes you'll see a pilot that's I think I've heard of that before. Again, it didn't happen while I was there, but there are pilots within the executive positions though, if not. But yeah, having an infantry officer, I always thought it would be good to have infantrymen or infantry officers come to Anglico just to help spread the knowledge, because so much of the stuff that Anglico is expected to do, yeah, they're fire support personnel for other people, but it's not like they're just going to show up and have their thumbs in their ass. They gotta participate. They gotta be an asset to whatever the mission is. And having an infantry background where people can like guide them through tactics and procedures and stuff, someone that's actually done it, I think would be a great asset.
I think the biggest advantage was me coming from JSOC at the time. I was exposed to a lot of higher end comm and techniques and procedures. And when I checked in, second was C5 and sorts readiness. You're familiar with that, right? And C5 is, you're about as broke as you can be. It's the lowest rating in sorts readiness. C1, you're fully man trained and equipped. And I checked in, and we had like 30% of the people. It was a mess. And General Amos, the future commandant, is a pilot, and he was the MEF commander. And I was at a staff meeting. I've been trying to fix the unit and wasn't getting any traction at all. I mean, it was, the staff kept telling me, you're not on the teep to go to Iraq. We'll get to you. In the meantime, we're kind of a joke. And I went to a MEF staff meeting. And the last thing they did was they briefed the sorts readiness, every squadron and battalion. And it was pretty quick. They go by regiment, and everybody's C1 or C2. If somebody's C3, it gets attention. It's usually manpower because they came back from a deployment and are doing the turnover. Mm-hmm. And the last slide was the independent battalion, 2nd Radbin, 2nd Force, 2nd Anglico. And everybody's C1 but 2nd Anglico, and it said C5. And General Amos is a kind of an older gentlemanly guy, and he doesn't swear a lot. He was like, holy shit, C5. I've never seen that. And he's like, is the CO Anglico in here? And everybody looks at me, and I stand up. I'm like, Lieutenant Colonel Campbell, sir. And he's like, is it really that bad? And my response is there a C6? And everybody laughed. And he's like, come see me after this. And when I went to his office, he asked me what the problem was. And, I didn't have an armory. I didn't have a barracks. I only had like 30% of the manpower. I didn't have radios. I didn't have vehicles. We were a joke. And he asked what I was doing about it. And I explained that his staff wasn't being the most supportive. And he asked me what I needed. And I had a notebook, and I said, I need $1 million today. I need you to call Manpower, Albany. And at the end, I said, I need you to put me on the teep to go to Iraq. Mm-hmm. And he was like, Scott, you're C5. What are you going to do in Iraq? I said, well, your third letter companies and all your battalions don't have facts. I can build JTACs. So I can seed the battlefield with controllers. And we're going to kill wholesale instead of retail with bombs. And I said, if I don't have the highest kill ratio in the MEF, when I get back, you can fire me. But we're going to do this on a macro level. And he thought about it and picked up the phone and called the chief of staff, a guy named Jaws White. Told Jaws, get Scott whatever he needs, and what he can't fix, he'd make the phone calls. And he said, I'll see you when you get back from Iraq. And 6 months later, we were in Iraq. And we built the first JTACs really that the Marine Corps had. This was in 2004, 2005 timeframe. And having the right general who's a pilot who saw the value in the JTAC program was huge. And he gave
Mhm.
us a lot of support. And we went to Iraq and had a great deployment. Didn't have any KIA on that deployment. We had some wounded, but we didn't have any killed. We came home, went on a 96. I think it was a Thursday we got back. And on Friday morning, the phone rings. There's General Amos's aide. And the general wants to see me. And I said, does he know I'm on a 96? He says, yeah, he knows. He wants to see you anyway. Be in his office at like 9 in the morning. Because usually, as you know, if the phone rings on a 96, on the morning of a 96, somebody's in jail.
Yeah, for sure.
And I went to General Amos's office, and I got ushered in, and he asked me how the deployment went. And I was kind of like, I think the general knows how the deployment went. And he's like, yeah, you guys did everything you said you were going to do. I need you to go back to Iraq in 6 months. What do you need? So we retooled and we went right back. So I was fortunate. I got 2 deployments with them.
So
but,
if you guys were at 30% personnel and stuff like that, if you guys basically didn't have anybody, what was the core of the unit at the time, and then who did you bring in and spin up, be ready to go? And you're talking in a 6-month period. That's pretty quick.
Yeah, they had this MEF liaison element, which was like the shadow of what ANGLICO had been before that. And so there were a bunch of 08 staff NCOs that were holdovers from back in the day in ANGLICO, and I think we had a couple of captains. And the 3 was there, and the XO, a pilot who's now my best friend, a guy named John O'Neill, a frog pilot. And literally within 2 weeks, people started showing up. And they built us the TO in probably about 45 days. And I traded out instead of getting the naval surface fires guys from the Navy, I got pilots because I could drop bombs with them.
Yeah.
And when we did the mission analysis, my 3 and XO and I sat down and we said, nobody needed us to do fire support coordination. It was all US the first tour. There was no Iraqis. So we really just needed to build teams to drop bombs. So every guy with a combat arms MOS, we built a team around. The challenge was I didn't have enough 08s or 03s or comm guys. So I had to pull, almost every team had one like supply guy, motor T, admin. My team, we called Team Geritol because my sergeant major was my observer, my spotter, and he was a comptroller in a prior life. My admin chief was my driver and EMT, and my assistant comm chief was my radio operator. So we emptied the barn and put everybody in the fight.
How do you get them ready for that though? Because call for fire is easy to do, a basic call for fire, but when you get in the intricacies of close air support, CAS and stuff, how do you get those guys ready in that sort of time?
Well, I was successful and a failure. You put I guess I'm sometimes my harshest critic. When we sent everybody to TACP school, got them their cards so they could drop bombs, and then you have to get the 300 and 400 level controls to certify them for combat, and we did that. The target. We weren't dropping smart ordnance at Camp Lejeune. So there was no GBU 12 or GBU 38, laser or GPS guided bombs. So when we got over into the fight, unless you were controlling a helicopter, everything was type 2. So you see the target, you don't see the airplane. Now we trained to do it. We taught them how to do it. They didn't have the reps and sets. So there was a steep learning curve the first time. Even for me, the first time I controlled a GBU 12, I can see the target and I'm talking to the pilot and he's IP inbound and you're looking up and you're not seeing anything. His wings level. Okay, cleared hot. It was a whole different game. So I trained them, but I didn't do enough repetitions of the right kind to get them ready. So when we were going back the second time, I put my pilots under an umbrella with a map and a radio, and I put the JTACs on the roof and I made them call, I think it was 15 GBU 12 simulations and 15 GBU 38 simulations, because it's all the same except the bomb, right? Because there's no airplane anyway, and I had plenty of jet pilots. So I had the jet pilots sit in a lawn chair and we got reps and sets. That's how we simulated it. And the next time, probably 80% of the guys went back to Iraq for the second go. And they were all, virtually all combat experienced veteran controllers at that point.
Yeah. So basically you got the basics, drilled into them. Here's the basic comm, flow. And then they kind of, then you get over there and you actually do it for real. And you kind of gain confidence and figure.
The other thing was everything we teach them to do in CONUS on the first time was the 9-line brief.
Yeah.
when you get to Iraq, you're doing keyhole modified 9-line and figuring out what's important and what's not, you know, because most of those guys were used to just reading the card. And now you're in combat and we have rovers in all of our vehicles. So we got the downlinks from the jets. I can see what the jet's seeing. And we're running the keyhole template for dropping bombs. And they adapted pretty quick once we showed them how the game was being played. But it was a different game than what we were teaching in the schoolhouse at the time in 2004.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I bet. And so what year was this that you guys went?
2005 and 2006.
Okay. I was wondering because so the first, and I'd love for someone to reach out if they know maybe different, but the first instance I've seen of Keyhole CAS being used, and for those that don't know what we're talking about, I know this is technical, the JTACs will get it, and the JFOs and stuff. Keyhole CAS is talking about how you're holding the aircraft and you're conducting attacks, and it's just off the compass. Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta is north, east, southwest. And you just say like Alpha 5, meaning they're holding to the north 5 nautical miles. And it's a real easy, quick way to orient aircraft rather than having tons of airspace measures built all over the place. And you got to remember names and code names and locations and stuff. It's an easy way to conduct attacks and route aircraft. I hadn't heard. So the first instance I had read of this being used was in Fallujah in 2004. Is that what did you guys get feedback from those guys and that's how you figured out keyhole?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, that, you know, the pass down from, you know, as the battalions and Anglicos come in and out, we got a pretty good debrief from the 3 in the air shop on how to conduct business and how to get air. And we were based at Al Assad, so we could go over and sit down with the squadrons. And, you know, they recorded that stuff on their lightning pods. So once a week, my XO or me or my OPSO, sometimes all 3 of us would go over different squadrons and look at what my guys are doing and critique it. What can we do better and how to, you know, because I don't own dirt. I just own guys that are out dropping bombs. And the staff, like the XO, OPSO, me, and my comm chief who'd been in 08, we took turns surging. So I didn't go out every day and drop bombs. It wasn't my job. Usually like once a week or every 2 weeks, a mission would come up and I'd be the next in the hopper and would go out. But we did a lot of refinement with the squadrons by just going over and sit down. Or when a new squadron checked in, you know, they don't know much about ANGLICO and how we're doing business. So we'd go over and sit down with them and give them a 3x5 card. Like, this is how we're doing business. These are the guys that are JTACs, because we were in the ATOs listed as JTACs. And it was a constant refinement of TTPs for both deployments.
I mean, really, that's the best thing you can do. That's how you get work. You know, if you're out there with all these special skills, but nobody knows that you got them, you know how to, or how to utilize them, then you have to put yourself out there and be like, hey, this is what I can do for you. Let's get some work going, you know? Well, who were you guys supporting over there?
Well, originally on the first deployment, we kind of scattered to the winds and were covering down on all the infantry battalions had at least one team. Recon got 2. And, you know, most of these battalion commanders are friends of mine. So I'd call them up and say, hey, I hear you're short, you know, a letter company needing a FAC. I said, I got a JTAC. You know, he comes with a whole team and a Humvee with a rover downlink. And we were the first guys using HPW, a gift I brought from JSOC. Nobody in the Marine Corps was using it. And when I checked in, I said, hey, why aren't we using HPW? They didn't even know what it was.
Do you want to explain what that is for people that don't know?
Yeah, you were able to hook your Toughbook computer to your PRIC 117 and open a program that looks just like your email Outlook. And you burst transmit data off the satellite. So basically, in a fraction of a second, I could send a Word document to division. So what we found was our strike reports, and we'd take BDA photos, and we could send that stuff on more than one occasion. Before the airplane landed, the team would send a picture and a strike report on the success of that to our CP. I shared a CP with General Smith, who has first 1 MEF right now. He had first force at the time, and I've known him forever. His brother was my best man. And anyway, George, we shared the CP, and they would send, it's, you know, a secret coming in on the HPW. And in those days, nobody really cared. We put a thumbstick into tough book, download the strike report and photo, put it into the zipper, download it into the zipper, and send it to the squadron. Many times before the pilots even landed, they had the strike report with a BDA photo. It was pretty cool.
How did the units like having you guys there?
No, we got rave reviews, to be honest with you. We had so much comm, and you're familiar with piss off, yes?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, that was fairly new, and only regiments and above had it. Well, all my teams had piss off, and they carried an external hard drive, so they had like half of Iraq's data in there, because we were the only one short of the division or a regiment that could, quote, immensurate a lat long for a JDAM, and we could do it off the piss off in real time. If you were in an infantry battalion, you had to call back to the regiment to get somebody to pull it up and send you the lat long for the target, because we all had the ground reference graphics, the GRGs.
Yeah.
And between that and you're driving around with Falcon View moving map, and you had piss off open. In the Air Force, we pirated a program the Air Force had that allowed piss off to talk to Falcon View. So if you're driving along and you make contact, you could touch the screen with a stylus and bring up piss off and touch on the screen where the target is. And it basically, the Air Force program would build your 9-line brief. You had to tell them where you were and where the IP was, but the target elevation, the lat long of the target would all be populated for you.
Yeah, this is like the first, like, bringing technology down to the ground like that. And now it's all on people's like tablets that people are carrying around on their chest. Yeah, piss off is targeting software for those that don't know. That's how we like find refined grids for GPS guided munitions and stuff like that. And also, like, we used it for putting out what is it called? CDE rings. Oh man, it's been so many years. I feel bad. It's casualty something estimate. I can't remember what CD, but it's the collateral damage estimate. That's right. Gosh, I feel like an idiot. It's weird how stuff that seems like secondhand while you're doing it kind of slowly slips away.
Well, what was interesting is I had a guy named Chris Pate who was killed on our second tour. Great young captain. And he was a reservist. He didn't have to go on the second one, but he didn't want his team to go back without him. I had a guy named Chris Pate and a guy that's about to retire, Brian Cook, a colonel, Frog/Osprey pilot. I made them my R&D guys, and I sent them over to JSOC. I sent them down to AFSOC. Nice. They came back. They figured out how to disable the GPS function in the.
Oh, I think I lost you again.
So we are limited by
hold on a second.
length.
Hold on a second. You got cut off for a second there. It cut off when you said GPS, and then I lost everything.
The Viper, when you lace the target, it had GPS embedded in it, so it give you your location and a range and bearing to a target. But you were limited by the length of the cable. You had to plug it into the Tough Book, and it was very limiting. If I needed you up on a roof, it's no good. Well, Brian and Chris Pate went, I think the Lytton made the thing. I can't remember the company. And they put a Bluetooth attachment into the Viper, and we disabled the GPS because we didn't want to put out because it's unencrypted. We didn't want to put out our location. But if I know where you are and I have a range and bearing to a target, we could Bluetooth that into the computer. They figured that out. They figured out, they came in one day with a C-Spot 3. Are you familiar with this gizmo?
Yeah.
Well, nobody was using it. And I don't know who makes it, but Brian brought the thing in and put it on my desk. He said, "Sir, that's C-Spot 3. I'm like, okay, what's it do? He's like, it sees 1064 radiation. So talk to me like I actually know what you're talking about. And he's like, sir, it sees the designator off the jet, not the IR pointer. It'll see the actual designator on the lightning pod. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. So he had I think it was Lytton. I can't remember. Well, we went out to the range and took a soft lamp out and fired it at a tank and looked through the gizmo, and you could see the sparkle on the tank. Well, we ended up buying like 30 of those things, and they weren't cheap.
Yeah.
They were like 20,000 a pop. And we bought a maintenance contract and we bought those things. And,
I had heard of them, but I've never used one. I know what you're talking about, but that was not something we ever used.
Well, the G6 wasn't real keen on me buying a thermal sight, wasn't tested. And it took me 2 seconds to convince General Avis. We went in to see him, and I said, "Sir, we're not going to miss. I will never. We'll have the pilot put the lightning pod, the designator on the target. He lights it up. I can verify right then and there. Yeah, we're looking at the same thing. Oh, not you're on the wrong house. We can eliminate the human error by making sure that we're looking at the same thing because I can see the designator." And he's like, "How many do you want?" And I'm like, "Well, I want 30 of them." So we had a couple left on the shelf, and we bought a maintenance contract, and I loaned out a couple to the MEF and second force.
That's so crazy. Like that kind of money is not around anymore. I don't think. I'm
No,
not
the
sure
OCO money was insane.
that's when did you kind of get that? Did you kind of get into that kind of, I guess, way of looking at how to like innovate, come up with new ideas to accomplish a mission coming from JSOC, or was that something from earlier on when you were...
JSOC's budget and technology exposed me into what's in the art of the possible. That's for sure. They have a lot of neat toys, and they have their own R&D, and they're on cutting edge of everything. And it was fairly simple just to see the linkage, because ANGLICO is not soft; it's soft-like. It's specially trained and equipped. It's not a common unit. There's similarities with soft, but it's not soft. And I brought what I learned from JSOC, what I thought would be applicable to the battlefield for that kind of unit. And it worked from the HPW. And like I said, I had my own little R&D team that was looking at, what's the Air Force doing? How are they looking to do this? I found the Air Force JTACs were quite good at what they do. They were better equipped than most. They tended not to go out in the dirt like Marines do. They tend to do most of their stuff from brigade or battalion COCs, where Marines are out, at the point of contact.
For sure.
As a rule, I'm not talking bad about the Air Force.
Quit disparaging the Air Force, man. Gosh, now we make fun of the Space Force. The Air Force is off the hook for a little bit, so we can make fun of the Space Force for a little while.
That's true.
That's true. I'm just playing, but seriously. No, okay. So let's back up though, because before you were at ANGLICO and you did all that, you were infantry battalion. Was it LAR? Like you were fourth Recon in Alaska. What was that like? I mean, were you guys doing some frozen beach raids?
That was one of the best jobs I ever had. I wanted to go back and get a company, but I'd already had a company as a lieutenant. And they wouldn't let me go back, and so I got my pick of the litter of INIs that were open. The monitor was a friend of mine. He's like, "Hey, I know you're kind of getting screwed, but I can't give you another company, so I'm going to send you to INI duty." But he had a list. In those days, we faxed the list. He said, "You can have the first pick up all the INIs that are open." So he faxed me a list. I was at Amphibious Warfare School, now EWS. And I got the list. I took it home and gave it to my wife. And I circled a couple in Texas where I'm from, and a couple up in Ohio where she was from. And I said, "You can pick. It's probably the only time in my career you're going to pick where we go next. INI duty's INI duty. Where do you want to go?" And she's like, "Okay, let me look at it." I poured her a glass of wine, went in the other room. She came in like 30 minutes later. "We're going to Alaska." I was like, "What the hell's in Alaska?" I didn't even look at that, And it was Echo Company 4th Recon. And it was a phenomenal job. The hunting and the fishing, we couldn't really get enough guys for a full company. Now that's why it's not there anymore. I think they turned it into a motor T unit. Finding swimmers in Alaska was a challenge.
Dang, turn it into a motor T unit. Went from Recon to motor T. That's tough. That'd be a tough, because for people that don't know, when a unit changes like that, you give the option. They can either get out, they could try to find another unit that needs their MOS, or they can become the new MOS for that unit that's there.
Yep.
Gosh.
But it was great. We did mostly winter ATs, Norway and Northern Edge. And we dove up there in dry suits most of the year. I logged hundreds of hours in a dry suit, something I never thought I would do.
That's wild, man. What's your take on this push into like the Arctic warfare? Like people are becoming concerned with like the Arctic and that area, all the minerals and stuff. Russia's obviously wanted to expand their influence, encroach and stuff like that.
Well, it's very unforgiving environment. And I don't think your average military unit, you're not just going to throw in that environment and have them excel. back in the day, Second Marines was the cold weather regiment, and we'd send them to Norway and Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. You really, in my opinion, you have to invest in the cold weather training if you're going to make them survivable, because so much of it's mental. And if you throw a guy I'm from El Paso. I was born in El Paso and lived in Texas, and not known for its snowfall.
Yeah.
So fighting yourself at minus 25 when you wake up in the morning and 18 inches of snow. It's a mental. You have to mentally prepare yourself and get used to that. And fortunately, I had a good staff up there that I'd been in snow before, but nothing that brutal cold in that duration. So I think there's a lot of value in having specialized units that focus on that. Obviously, we have a brigade in Alaska, Stryker Brigade. We have the 10th Mountain up at Fort, I think, Drum. And the Marine Corps has kind of gone away from it, although I think we're starting to pivot back now that with the focus back again with the Russians.
I had an opportunity because I was a mechanic when I first came in and I did a lat move. But when I was a mechanic, I worked on the EFSS, the Expeditionary Fire Support System. And that's the 120 millimeter mortar. It's a little Jeep thing. It was so awesome. We no longer use it. So that tells you, I guess, what you need to know about it. But we got to go up to Bolio Lake test facility and do this cold weather testing, shooting 120 millimeter mortars, driving around and stuff like that. And it was a super interesting opportunity. And you're right, like being in that kind of cold, like the negative 20s, is just like a completely different. You have to have a completely different mindset. Yeah,
well,
like
the best.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the best part of it was, I was in I think 118 degrees in Ethiopia once, and I think minus 30 was my record in Alaska. When you go through temperature extremes like that, you know what your body can take. And as a leader, you realize that, hey, this sucks for me. If you're a Lance Corporal who doesn't control his destiny and you got some asshat captain telling you what to do, it even sucks more for that guy.
Yeah, for sure.
Being aware of your limitations and what you can take and how you motivate and inspire people under adverse conditions. And I found the cold weather can break guys mentally. But busting the seal on your sleeping bag when it's minus 25 is not a happy experience. But if you're around guys that know what they're doing and are motivated and are professional, nobody wants to be the quitter. That's what keeps you going, But as you said, it's a totally different world in that kind of cold.
100%, and it's like everything about it, even like moving. Hoping your vehicles are going to work. Like they're all certified to work in Arctic weather and stuff like that. But the reality is like it's going to set in, and I don't know. There's going to be issues. There's going to be growing pains, especially since it's not something we've been kind of doing a lot of, rotating units there. I know we have guys that go to Norway and do the I think it's called the Black Sea rotation, B-surf or something like that. Yeah, and go and do that stuff and kind of maintain some cold weather stuff. I always see like the videos of them doing the ice plunges, and I'm like, man, I would do it if I was there, but that shit looks miserable,
Yeah. Well, just getting in the water in a dry suit. We did limpet mine attacks on Navy ships during Northern Edge, and I think that was in February. And you get in the water with the wind chill, it's probably minus 20. And you're going to swim a limpet mine in. We didn't dive because they'd never see us if we dove. So we surface swam, through white caps and minus 20 carrying a damn limpet mine. It was, God. So, like I say, you're in a dry suit, though. At least you're not wet. But it's still, the minute you quit finning, you could feel the heat getting sucked out of the dry suit.
Yeah. So you're saying you had to swim on the surface so the ships could see you? Like you were giving them a competitive advantage? Oh, that's no fair.
They never caught us, 99% of the time, because all you're seeing is this.
Yeah.
We don't wear goggles because they'll reflect light. You black your face out. You got a black hood on. This is the only thing sticking up out of the water. You're negative buoyant. You just have a buoyancy compensator, a mine, a knife, and your fins. And you bleed down your buoyancy compensator, so you're just a little negative. So you can drop under the surface of the water if you have to. And you swim in pairs. And we'd swim in and slap the mines on and swim off, and very rarely did they see us. We did it in daylight once or twice too.
What's the distance you guys are swimming to do that?
Well, at night, like, it depends. Like in Seward, I think we dropped off the boats about a mile out
Hmm.
off the Zodiac, a mile and a quarter out. We did it in Ketchikan, Alaska. It wasn't as cold in Ketchikan. There was an island in the middle of the channel, and we'd come up the backside of the island in the dark and get dropped off and walk across the little island. It was maybe 40 or 50 meters wide, and get back in the water and swim maybe a quarter mile across the channel to put the mines on the boat. Sitka was a little different. Those were the three places: Seward, Sitka, and Ketchikan. Seward was the worst because it was cold. I mean, it was Ketchikan and Sitka are down in the kind of like the panhandle of Alaska, and it's more rainforest.
Hmm.
So you didn't get minus 30. You got like 35 degrees and rain, which I thought, to be honest, was worse because you're wet. You tend to get wet even when you're walking around, and 35 degrees and wet, it to me is worse than minus 20 and dry.
Mm.
Because the wet just seeps into your soul. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's, dude.
I mean, we've all been wet, right? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah. No, I haven't been wet and then that cold though. That's crazy. To me, it seems like that would be like a fourth Recon battalion there or unit there that's there all the time, and then also facilitating training for other units to come through to like rotate through and get that training would be a good idea, because you guys probably became like the premier people for that kind of environment. During that time
we
frame.
hosted fifth force and third recon and second recon, and we hosted SEALs. I had my own barracks, which was unique, so you could come up there and we could house 150 guys.
Nice.
For free. And we could check out vehicles from the Air Force. We had ski paths. So like some units would come in and just spend a week skiing out behind in the woods, out behind my CP, get used to, cross country skiing with a ruck. And we had great ranges. It was fantastic. It was funny though, like when a lot of us older guys, we had to do the LAR-5 transition because we were open circuit and we had to go to a closed circuit system. So they sent a team up to train us, and to do our open water, we had to go down to Seward. It was like February, and these guys came up from Second Force, and we told them, "Hey, look, we dive up here all the time. We got some recommendations for stuff you need to wear and bring." And they're like, "No, we know what we're doing. We dive all the time in the cold." I'm like, okay. No, we wore neoprene yarmulkes under the rubber caps, because if you have old metal fillings, when the water settles in on the crown of your head, your teeth would ache. So wow. The yarmulke warms the water up inside the rubber hood. The rubber hood doesn't warm the water up. The neoprene yarmulke did. And we wore those second skins, and then you wore your pile suit. Then you put on the dry suit. We didn't use gloves. We used lobster claws, because you could retract your hands out of the gloves and keep them warmer. And after like the second day in Seward, they're like, yeah, we need to go buy some stuff, because they were used to cold. They weren't used to that kind of cold.
How do you even operate? I mean, you're talking about with all that stuff on, how much more difficult does it make doing like a swim to put a limpet mine on a ship? Just the gear, or the thickness.
Well, because you're wearing a dry suit's basically a giant balloon, for lack of a better word, and there's a valve on your arm, so you want to bleed all the air out of the suit. So if you want to bleed the air out of your suit, if you hold your hand up over your head, the air will bleed out. So you want to be negative. So you bleed all the air out of the suit. You wear a weight belt, because I don't care who you are, you got to wear some weight to get negative, because you're wearing a big air pocket. So you're wearing like 3 times the amount of weight you'd normally wear to get negative. And then you have to put on a buoyancy compensator, because if you get in trouble, you have to pop the CO2 canister. Most of the time, we just bleed the air out and blow the air into it to adjust our buoyancy, so we're a little negative. But yeah, it's just everything in the cold is cumbersome and requires thought. It's not like in Iraq where you get up and brush your teeth, knock the dust out of your rifle, and no, everything you do, how many calories you're eating, your sleep, because it's fatiguing. The cold just saps your strength. Doing simple things, much less cross country skiing or swimming and that kind of crap.
How did you find, how different was shooting? When you're talking, let's say you're on a range and it's negative 15. Obviously just the fact that you're not bare skin probably shooting. You probably have some kind of glove on. How does that affect how well you could shoot, how fast you could shoot, reload, stuff like that.
Everything's slower.
Yeah.
Everything, because it's not like you're wearing a flight glove where you have texture in your fingers. When it's -20, you're wearing a big, heavy, cold weather glove.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting the feel of the trigger, getting your finger in the trigger well can be a challenge depending on the type of glove you're using. A lot of guys wear a fleece lined glove, so they'd have an outer shell in the fleece glove. They'd shoot with a fleece glove and then put their glove back on. And you have to have two sets of everything, because if you're skiing, I usually would strip down to just like a Capeline shirt and my Gore-Tex. Nobody wore utilities up there in the cold. You just wore your Capeline, your Polypro, and your Gore-Tex, and you'd strip down to just Capeline to ski in, because you're going to sweat. You're carrying 100 pounds, and even if it's 5 degrees or -10, you're going to sweat. And then when you stop, you have to immediately take off the wet crap, put dry stuff on, have mittens. Mittens are invaluable. They're not very functional for 90%, but once you stop for the night, you got to be able to put on dry stuff and warm up. We even had little square pee bottles, because I'm not breaking the seal on my sleeping bag at 2 in the morning to go pee. That ain't going to happen. So everybody had these little square Nalogen bottles, and they're square because you're not going to confuse it with the round ones.
Yeah. Nice.
And they were short, so you could lean over and pee in the thing. And then you make sure the lid's on tight and put it down between your feet. It helped warm up your feet.
Hardcore, man. That's a way to live up there.
It was different. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I enjoyed my time up there. It was really awesome seeing just the landscape. And I was like, man, this is like, we had those, what do they call them? Arctic cats or something like that. Like 2 boxes on tracks. You know what I'm talking about? We were driving those too. And it was just, I don't know, man. It'd be crazy to think about trying to fight in an environment like that and sustain, in the elements.
Well, jumping up there was hilarious, because in the height of the winter, it just piles and piles up. And the DZ at Fort Richardson is called Malamute. And, there'd be like 4 or 5 feet of snow. So when you jump out, we jump with skis. I think we were the only Marines that routinely did that. You literally are a lawn dart. There's no PLF. You go, into the snow, and then you have to waddle yourself on top, get your skis on, and then you can unscrew your parachute and do everything else.
That's wild.
And I had a bunch of snowmobiles. I think we had 6 snowmobiles, and my boss was down in San Antonio. 4th Recon's headquarters was in San Antonio, and we had to replace 2 of them. They were worn out. And he was like, "You guys are just playing on them." And I'm like, "You think so, sir? Come on down and jump with me." And he came in for a winter jump. And after the jump, he's like, "Okay," because you can't recover a body or, an injured guy off the drop zone without a snowmobile. Ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
So he was like, "Okay, I get it. I'll buy you 2 new ones." But simple thing like the plow on, we had a Suburban and we had a plow on the front of it.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came, he was like, "Do you really need a plow?" Like, "Well, who's going to plow my parking lot of my barracks? Wait for the Air Force to do it? I'll spend a week after a heavy snow before they get out to me. I'm the last priority. I'm a tenant command." So we had to plow our own road. So I had to have a plow. So when we bought a new Suburban, it had to have the attachment for the plow. And again, it was kind of like, "Really? You need that?" Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy, man. I wonder how well equipped we are. I think we're noticing it. I think it's kind of like the Pacific, these islands where we're like, we need to think long term about how we're gonna, accomplish our mission there. I think people are also doing the same thing with like the Arctic and stuff like that. And I don't know. I wouldn't want to do it. I mean, I think the only comparable thing that we could think about is Korea, chosen reservoir time frame where dudes were freezing there, talking about getting shot, and it was so cold that like the blood freezing was stopping dudes from dying. Like it's just a whole nother level of and the gear. We went to Abolio Lake, which is outside of I don't even remember, some small little town where people were like missing parts of their faces and stuff, or they'd been caught out and it was, I was like, this isn't even like a abnormal thing. It's pretty normal to see someone missing like a finger or missing like tips of their ears and stuff. Just a crazy environment. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, like the Mickey Mouse boots and just having the different kind of gear available to fight through that.
We got to test a ton of it because we lived in that crap. So all the cold weather gear they wanted tested came up to us. We got to test snowshoes and skis and boots and gloves, and it was pretty nice. because there was just, it seemed like a never ending amount of gear. And then we got to keep it if it was worth, because most of that stuff, you either DRMO it or we could add it to our TE up there because nobody cared. And we had a huge supply warehouse filled with all kinds of test gear.
That's awesome. Yeah, we got to test some stuff too, actually, because we were going up there with that vehicle, but they were like, hey, while you're there, we're going to send all this new gear. And I don't know if you ever, I'm sure you saw them, but the fleece, the Marpat fleece and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I remember having that and coming back from Alaska and wearing it one time at Camp Lejeune and getting stopped like 3 times. Like, what the fuck are you wearing? And I'm like, because no one had seen it yet. They were like, what, I'm like, hey man, I'm like, it's got the Marcor Syscom tag in it. I'm like, this is
it's real.
Yeah. And it was funny because I went to the Marine East Expo, which is, I always tell people, like, if you're on base and one of those expos are happening each year where they show all the new equipment and stuff, you should go to those. But I remember going to it and they were actually displaying it and I was wearing it. And they're like, where the hell did you get it? And I was like, oh yeah, we tested it up in Alaska. It was a good time.
Well, you said you tested the EFFS, I think. Yeah, I love the 120. I took that thing on my MEU. And that thing, I know you were right. We got rid of it, but God, I thought that thing was awesome. Because what it allowed you to do is we had 777s on one ship, we had the 120s on one ship, and I had 81s on one ship. So I had fire support, indirect fire support capability on all 3 of the ships. So no matter how we broke the MEU up, whoever was in charge of that chunk, if they had to go ashore, had an indirect fire support weapon system. And it was a sad day when we got rid of it. The little Jeep thing that towed it around sucked, but the mortar itself was pretty solid.
Damn, that's the part I worked on, was the Jeep part.
Well, no, we had a lot of maintenance problems on it. I think that was...
I was the mechanic, and I told him at the time, I was like, hey man, this is a cool vehicle. Like, it's got super capable, it's got these weird whatever, but it's not marine proof. You need to be able to jump in and turn it on. This thing's got rear steer that can get messed up. It's got airbags that you could be riding at the wrong height. And I'm like, dude, Marines are going to mess with all this stuff. You're telling them they're going to see, hey, let's see if the rear steer unlocks while we're driving. You know what I'm saying? That's just, so it's like putting all that stuff on there is cool, but it's not cheap for the units to replace that stuff when it starts breaking. Cause you're talking about, we were using, the vehicle itself was like 150 grand. Absolutely ridiculous. I like the UTVs they're using now. I think those are sick.
Yeah, they're like 20 grand. You could buy one of those Gator type things, a 4-wheel drive, Suzuki, paint it tan and drive that thing anywhere.
Yeah, those things are wicked, and they could probably tow those 120s with it. They could probably set it up somehow to tow them. But I liked it. I drove it. It was a fully capable vehicle. I've seen it submerged. I've seen it rolled over on its side in water and ratchet strapped back over and kept rolling. I've seen it. We've driven it in Alaska. We've driven it through Camp Pendleton, or not Camp Pendleton, 29 Palms, all over the desert and stuff. I put a few thousand miles on it in testing, and it was cool, but it was just not practical. It was a bitch to get in and out of the Osprey. So it's not like it's really going to be able to set down and pull out real fast and get set up within like seconds. It's going to be minutes, and it's just not, I don't know, but yeah, it was interesting though. It was a really good opportunity. Like, being a mechanic was the most miserable thing I've done. And that was an opportunity to break away because I was with MLG. So it was like, oh, I get to go to the field. Oh, I get to shoot stuff. I'm watching mortars.
You said it best, but you said it wasn't marine proof.
Yeah.
Because like, I don't know how long you were in, but by 30 years, every time I thought I'd seen a Marine do the stupidest thing, like, well, that's it. There's always somebody that one up it. Then you sit back like, that may be the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah. It's just, with the numbers of 18 to 22-year-olds you're getting, there's some idiots in there, and they will do some dumb stuff. Just not even idiots, but curious. And they're like, yeah, whatever. Like, it's not my vehicle, and I don't have to fix it. That was the worst part about being a mechanic, was fixing everybody else's mistakes. When you're the driver and you don't have to fix it, you're like, oh, maybe I'll hit that button and see what happens, And that's what dudes will do.
It's not a criminal element, generally speaking. It's an inquisitive element. Or, I wonder what would happen if I did this,
Yeah. So when you got orders away from Alaska and you were heading back, you went to 2nd Recon after that, right?
Yeah. I went to be this XO 2nd Recon.
What was going through your head then? Because then, it's a completely different environment. Like, obviously, you're leaving a really good opportunity behind and stuff like that.
Well, it was, I kind of, when I went to the recon community, I was kind of told that my career was over. It was interesting that, hey, you're killing your career, you're doing the recon thing. And then I went to second recon, and then I went to second force, and got to be the CO for like 19 months or something. And I thought that was where it was going to end. And then I got invited to JSOC. And when I took that job, they're like, hey, you're never getting command. You're really killing yourself. And then, yeah, I been selected to lieutenant colonel. But what's funny, when I left second force, I had to go to 2-6. Why? I'm a recon guy at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'd never served in a pure infantry battalion. And I wasn't going to get a serious look to promotion to lieutenant colonel unless I went to the infantry, because I was a primary MOS infantry officer. So I left the job and this is the way I asked the monitor. I said, so you're telling me I have to leave second force to go to second battalion, 6th Marines to be the XO, so I can make lieutenant colonel, so I might command the unit I currently command. And he's like, well, when you word it that way, you make it sound stupid. But that's what I did. I went over to 2-6. We went to 22 MEU. General Lefebvre was the MEU commander. He knew where I came from. I was put in charge of the MSPF, and I did all the crap with the recon guys with the MEU. And we came back, and then I went to the Republic of Georgia. So it was just weird how it worked out. And then when I went to JSOC, they told me, you'll never get promoted, you'll never command. And then look what happened. I ended up getting a regiment.
Do you think that's normally, do you think that's normally the case though? Do you think that's normal, like the normal career path? If you do stray off of it, you make that risk of not getting a command or not getting those opportunities you're hoping for?
Well, you certainly decrease your chances as a command when you go into the recon community. And I was fortunate, because when I went to JSOC, we were standing up MARSOC. And all of a sudden, I'm a flavor of the month. I'm one of a handful of Marine officers that was in JSOC. I think there were 3 of us. And all of a sudden now, I'm getting called to go talk to PP&O about what's it like on the, the black soft side, and how would it look, So I was sitting in on meetings with PP&O and the ACMAC and the commandant, talking about special operations for the Marine Corps, because I assumed at that point, if I commanded anything, it might someday be in MARSOC.
Mm-hmm.
But my timing wasn't real good, because MARSOC didn't hit its stride for several years later. And I ended up at ANGLICO. And then I went to War College in Africa, U.S. Africa Command, to run counterterrorism ops. And then I told my wife, I said, well, if I slate for anything, it might be the regiment at MARSOC. I'm probably going to come back. I'll do my 3 years as a colonel. If I get something in MARSOC, great. Otherwise, I was told I was going to go be the deputy commander at MARSOC, and I just retire from there with like 26 years in. And I ended up getting the MEU. Like, guys with my pedigree don't get MEUs. I think I'm the only Anglico CO to ever get a MEU. Like that doesn't happen. Yeah. And my wife, when I found out, she was like, you don't know shit. You said you weren't going to get anything. You said you might get something in MARSOC, but nothing was open this year. You don't know what you're doing.
The MEU is almost a tryout to become a general for a lot of times, right?
Well, yeah. And that's what was funny. This is the rest of that story. I was actually in Berlin on leave when my phone rang, and I'd gone for a run and left my phone. And I came back, and my wife's like, your phone rang. I said, why didn't you answer it? She's like, it's your phone. It's your work phone. So I called a guy named Pete Ahern, who commanded one of the reserve Anglicos. I called Pete up, and he ran current ops at AFRICOM. And he's like, hey, we got a target. And the general, we're going to get on the phone and have to brief Admiral McCraven. And I guess, I can't remember the Navy guy that was the chairman, Mike Mullen. General Admiral Mullen was, and he's like, hey, we're gonna have to brief this thing this afternoon. The journal wanted to know if you're gonna be back, because my team was working on it. We did this a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, I can be back by noon. And he's like, all right. And he's like, oh, by the way, the list came out. You got command of 15th MEU. And we always screwed with each other. How Marines are, right? I'm like, yeah, right. Because like, I thought I had 0 chance at a MEU. He's like, I'm not screwing with you. I sent you the message. It's on your BlackBerry. So I'm like, okay, thanks. And I pull it up, and sure enough, it says I got 15th MEU. And my wife was laying in bed, and she's like, what's going on? I said, oh, we got to get back, get the girls up. We got to get back. We got a target we're working on today. And the general wants me there to brief it. And she's like, what's the other thing you were talking to Pete about? I said, oh, I got command of 15th MEU. And my wife sat up and looked at me. She's like, guys like you don't get used because, you know, she's
That's
been around
funny.
the Marine Corps 25 years. She's like, you're not that guy. I'm like, it says, and I showed her, and she was like, holy crap. So we got back to Stuttgart. We ended up not pulling the trigger on that target, but I got home at like 2200 from the briefing. And finally, we had to get presidential approval to do anything in Africa, and we couldn't get it on this target. So I got home at like 2200, took a shower, and I'm kind of excited. Like, you know, this is a dream come true. This is the culminating job of my career. I'm going to command a MEU. Never thought I'd get to do that. And I pour myself like a triple scotch because I'm amped up. You know, I'm excited. And I sneak into the bedroom and kind of sit back in the bed and hold my scotch. And I'm like, and my wife's like, I'm really pissed off at you. And it's pitch black in there. I can't see her. And I'm like, you know, I haven't surfed porn on your computer. I mean, why are you mad at me? And I'm like, what's wrong? And she's like, I can do math and look at a calendar. I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, we're going to go to California, and that's a 3-year tour. That's going to take you to 27 years or 26 years. She's like, and they wouldn't give you a MEU if you weren't at least semi-competitive for general. So you're going to want to stick around for 2 looks for BG, which means we're at 28 years. Hell, I'm stuck in this shit for 30 years now. We might as well ride it out. And I hadn't thought about any of that. I'm just giddy. I'm going to get to command a MEU. And so I've lost the initiative. You know, my wife's taking the attack to me. So I counterattack like a good brain. I'm like, I can't believe they're being this selfish. There was this long pause, and she's like, selfish? And I'm like, wait a minute. I said, this is the culminating event for me in my career, getting an opportunity to command a MEU. And all you could think about is how it's negatively going to impact you. You can't let me enjoy the moment for like a day before you bring this up. I said, that's selfish. And there was this long pause, and I'm kind of like, and she's like, you know, I'm proud of you, and I know you're good at your job, and you're right. I should have let you enjoy the moment. Yeah.
That's crazy though,
So
man.
yeah, I realized if I didn't take the attack to her in that moment, I was lost. And she ended up like, yeah, okay. But yeah, it was I still can't believe I got a chance to do that.
I mean, I'm going to be honest. I hated being on the MEU. It was what made me get out of the Marine Corps. It's got to be tough. What is it like to command a MEU? You know, you're the Marine Expeditionary Unit. When you're the CO, you're in charge of a shit ton of people. You know,
About 2,500 people. Yeah.
Across 3 ships, and who knows how many locations because people are flying
31
all over the
airplanes.
World.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's it's lonely at the top also, right? You know,
well, you got to remember there's 5,000 eyeballs always watching what you do. Do you PT? Do you wear your uniform right? You know, how do you conduct yourself when shit goes wrong? You know, everybody's always looking at you. And the biggest challenge isn't everybody thinks you're drawing arrows on a map and planning tactics. Yeah, I got majors and captains, and I've done enough of this where I can pretty much smell bullshit when I see it. I can pick a problem apart pretty quickly. I got plenty of guys thinking tactically. What I don't have is a lot of guys thinking about safety and logistics and command relationships. On a given day, I had the USS Pearl Harbor was up in Kuwait doing stuff with a chunk of the MEU. I had the Green Bay off the coast of Somalia supporting JSOC, and I'm on the Pelelu in the Red Sea in an op box prepared to do a NEO in Khartoum or Sanaa. You know, I have to have smart people that I trust to do things separated by hundreds of miles. And I'm working for CENTCOM, I'm working for AFRICOM for Sudan, and I'm working for JSOC down off the coast of Somalia. So, you know, who's more important in a given moment? Mm-hmm. You know, so the command relationship juggle, and then I have the relationship with the Navy, which wasn't always great. Most of the time it was, but there's always some friction with my counterpart in the Navy. So the amount of sleep I probably averaged 4 to 5 hours a night for 7.5 months, because I don't sleep if the flight deck's open. Generally, it opens at noon, closes at midnight, and I'm up to PT at 4:30 in the morning, 5 in the morning, because you know how the Marines clobber the gym by 6. Yeah. So I have to beat the Marines in the gym, eat, read my email, and then I'm in meetings all day. Or you know, it's sleep deprivation and worrying every waking minute, because you know, like I said, who's thinking about safety on the flight deck? You know, am I pushing the guys too hard? Do you fly 7 days a week or not? I tried to fly only 6 days a week if we could keep the quals up. Letting the guys up on deck, the combat cargo and the flight deck guys have a day of rest. Let the maintainers take some time off, because fatigue breeds complacency. And I was always worried about, if we lose people in combat, it's terrible. When you lose people due to stupid training and safety things, it's unacceptable. So I was constantly thinking about, how do I, the moms and dads of America trust me with their sons and daughters. I need to be a steward of that resource and take care of those young men and women, and make sure I'm aware when I'm pushing. When I need to surge them, they'll surge. You know that. Marines will surge and they'll fight their asses off for you. But if you don't have to run them into the ground, don't. So balancing the op tempo when you're in an op box for 3 months, just cutting squares in the water,
Miserable.
Yeah. How do I make the life of that Lance Corporal a little better? It's funny because everybody thinks, oh, well, you're the MEU commander. We did a casualty drill during, I think, Comp 2X. And a bunch of Marines were moulaged up, and they brought them aboard Pellu and took them into sick bay. And I walk in there and there's a Marine all, moulaged up. And I'm like, hey, Marine, how's it going? Typical, Lance Corporal's like, hey, sir, this is great. They're bringing me food and water, and I just laid her out all day. Good day to be a grunt, I don't have to do anything. And so I chatted with him, and I said, well, hey, thanks for what you're doing. He's like, hey, can I ask you a question, sir? I'm like, yeah, sure. What do you got? And he's like, who are you?
Oh.
And of course, his sergeant major, the battalion commander, were horrified. I'm like, I'm the MEU commander. And he's like, you're in charge of all this? I'm like, well, yeah, kind of. And he's like, wow, so you're the boss. And I'm like, yeah, well, it was just funny because you think you're a big deal? That Lance Corporal couldn't have picked me out of a lineup.
That's
it was
hilarious.
kind of humbling, that this kid was doing what he's told, helping us do a mass CAS drill, has no clue who I am, and my picture's on flyers, the sexual harassment policy. It's not like I'm hiding, but
yeah.
I'm not relevant to that kid.
That's crazy. And what's crazy is everyone is relevant to you, because any misstep or any kind of safety issue, like you were talking about before, anything always comes back down to the CO. It's always like, hey, man,
one bad decision away from sitting at a long wooden table with a microphone and a glass of water.
And it doesn't even have to be your bad decision. It could be somebody else's. And it was like, hey, you were in charge of him. How did you build him up to make these kinds of decisions?
Yeah, well, the number of people that bought me risk, when I make a decision about, hey, I'm going to drive drunk today, that's my decision, right? Well, when you're a MEU commander and you're stuck in an op box, and I don't want to talk bad about my ESG commander, but I will. He and I didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. We had a series of engagements that weren't very pleasant. Well, there was a target in Somalia, and he called and he was like, what would you assess your readiness to do a raid into Somalia? And I thought about it, and I said, about a 6 or a 7 out of 10. And he's like, 6 or a 7? What do you mean you're a 6 or a 7? I said, well, our last tactical event we did with the MRF was in October or November. And then we had 2 weeks of leave, and then we embarked and took a month to get over here. And we immediately went into an op box into the Red Sea, and we've been here for 60 days. My force guys haven't done any real tactical shooting in 100 days. My pilots haven't landed on the dry part of the planet in about 100 days. Now, can I go do the raid? Yes. And can I mitigate that risk? Yes, I can come up with ways to mitigate the risk. If you give me a rehearsal, if we steam past Djibouti and I can go do a practice raid in Djibouti, I put myself in the 8 ring, maybe the 9 ring. But you don't get to sit for 3.5 months on a ship and atrophy your skills and think you're going to play varsity ball on Friday night. It's not the way it works. So every day you leave me in this op box, you're buying me risk. Next time my pilots have to land in a dark, dusty zone, I can compensate. I can spread my helicopters out. I won't land as tight. There are things I can do to mitigate that risk, but I have to mitigate risk because my guys haven't been doing it. They fly all the time, just they're not landing in dark, dusty zones in a division of helicopters. And I had the last CH-46 squadron too, which was kind of cool. But, you know, you have to think about those things because I'm writing a check with your life. You were one of my young sergeants, right? You got some ass bag colonel saying, yeah, we can go do it. We'll do it tonight. Well, don't let your enthusiasm overload the reality of where you are. When we left Camp Pendleton, we were superbly trained. And every week that goes by, that you're slowly degrading your combat capabilities. And it's not because the Marines aren't ready. They're as ready as they can be based on the training that they've been able to do since you set sail.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you can shoot on the flight deck. How much value is that?
Yeah, that's the battle, man. That's the battle 100%. I think that was always my argument. I'm like, why do we have this many people out here? I'm like, why don't we have people just forward staged, ready to get on planes to go somewhere? You know, people in Kuwait or people in 29 Palms, and they're just continually training and going through and busting the rust. Keep a company on the ship to go do these, you know, these exercises with foreign nations and stuff, so we can still do that, and we still have a force that can move around on ship. But to have all these people that rely on getting out and doing their jobs, to be good at their jobs on a ship, man, I've said this story. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I mean, I was just miserable. When I said I got out because of the MEU, was because I was a JTAC, my second MEU, they sent me on when I was like, hey man, if you send me on this, I'm getting out. I was a JTAC evaluator, and my role was to sit on ship and answer the phone on duty once a week, because I was with the command element. And the MEU OPSO, he didn't even want to let me go ashore to get controls to maintain my E qualification. Like, the captains had to explain to him, like, hey, what are you doing? You know, you're going to let this
I rotated all my guys. In fact, with the Green Bay had to go support JSOC, we offloaded most of the grunts, flew them to Kuwait.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I got the tanks off the ship 3 or 4 times. General Donovan, who's now the deputy commander of SOCOM, is an old friend of mine. We were in fast company together. We used to have an argument about tanks on the MEU. He's a light guy, you know, they're heavy and we don't need them. And my argument, I lost the argument because we got rid of tanks, but tanks like Porsche, there's no substitute. When you need a tank, you really need a fucking tank. And there's nothing that's going to replace that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was in Mogadishu during Black Hawk Down with my fast platoon on the roof. Watch that thing go down with the JSOC LNOs, listening to that crap on the radio. For the want of one M1 tank platoon, we suffered a lot of casualties. So, you know, having the ability to break out the baseball bat when you're off the coast and go crush somebody's skull, you know, MEU has more combat power than most third world countries. The upgrade to the Joint Strike Fighter, in my current job, I'm a contractor for the Marine Corps. I work on various projects, and I've been to sea a lot since I retired. And I was out with 15th MEU, my old MEU, and a guy named Bronze. He was a CO, and he had Joint Strike Fighters. And the F-35 taken off compared to old Harrier, it's like listening to a Model T drive down the flight deck as opposed to a Ferrari.
Yeah.
Because when we were launching airstrikes into Yemen, we'd turn the Peleliu. We had the last LHA, the old Peleliu, and we turned her into the wind, and it was like, give her all she's got, Scotty. You know, we'd floor the thing into the wind because the Harrier taken off, it had 2 smart bombs, 2 500-pounders, 2 external fuel tanks, and a lightning pod. And when it got to the end of the ship, it would drop off the end of the ship, and everybody's leaning forward to the tower, kind of holding their breath. And then the thing would waddle into the sky, you know, like a pregnant duck. The F-35 hits the end of the flight deck and turns its nose up, and it's like a scalded cat. It's got its ass lit on fire. It goes into the stratosphere in seconds. The Harrier waddled into the sky. And, you know, the technology of being able to pose that kind of threat off a coast with a battalion of Marines, there's some value in that. Plus the nation building, you know, the humanitarian assistance stuff, plus the training and maintaining relationships.
It was, for me, it was just hard to go, this is worth leaving my family. This is worth,
I get it.
You know,
and some guys don't get off the ship much. The maintainers for helicopters, you know, they don't get off the ship much.
Miserable.
I used to wander the ship at night. Like once or twice a week, I'd get up at like 1 or 2 in the morning to see what was going on. And I remember going down to the flight deck. We had a Harrier taken apart and had the engine out. And there was this Marine laying on a dolly or on the non-skid under working on something, and I'm just in a pair of overalls. Like, who the fuck are you?
Hold on. Start over. You cut out again when you said you were in a pair of overalls.
Yeah. So I went down to the hangar deck to see the night maintenance crew.
Yeah.
And there's a Marine laying on his back working on some gizmo, and I laid down next to him, and I'm like, "Hey, Marine, what are you doing?" And, you know, in classic, like, Marine foreman's like, "Who the fuck are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm Colonel Campbell. I'm the MEU CO." And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir." I'm like, "No, we're good. I just want to, you know, walk around and see what you guys do at night." And he's like, "Well, I'm on the night shift and I'm tearing down this engine." And, you know, I laid there and talked to him for like 10 or 15 minutes and thanked him for what he did. That guy never gets off the ship, you know, and we only hit 3 ports on that MEU.
Miserable.
Yeah. We pulled
miserable.
into Thailand. We pulled into Aqaba for washdown. We pulled into UAE and Hong Kong, 4 ports.
That's dangerous for you as a CO, though. You know, and when guys or when people don't get off the ship and they're all this pent up, like, you know, energy from being on ship for months at a time, and now you're releasing them into Thailand. What's going through your mind that first night?
Well, you know, it was on our way over. We hit Thailand. We hit Hong Kong coming home, and as we were pulling in, I guess the aircraft carrier had some issues, and there were all kinds of veiled threats from 7th Fleet about not screwing it up when we went into Thailand. And the Navy way of briefing and the Marine, at least my way of briefing, are a little different. So we got all the Marines and sailors on the hangar deck that weren't on duty. And, you know, the Commodore gets up and talks about your ambassadors, be on your best behavior. And the Navy captain gave the safe kind of speech. And I talked last, and I said, "Look around you. Look to your left and right." I said, "There's about 5% of the guys and gals on this hangar deck that are assholes and are going to F this up for everybody." I said, "We don't have enough officers and staff NCOs to be in every bar and whorehouse." And I said, "You know, just be advised that prostitution is illegal according to the UCMJ. You're not supposed to buy hookers. I know there's a lot of temptation out there. Understand that not all the hookers are as advertised. That some of them may not have the equipment you think you're renting, and that can be quite traumatic." I said, "But you get drunk and beat up a hooker or wreck a jeepney or do something stupid, they'll secure our liberty and we'll look at Thailand from the gray rails of the penitentiary, the Pellet. So you guys have to clean that mess up. I can't fix it. You want liberty, you secure the mess in town. Because if you don't, they'll secure our liberty like that."
Yeah.
So it's on you. And guess what? When we went down to the quarterdeck, you know, we're getting off the ship, because now you could like scan the IDs. It was a lot faster than back in the day. And all the Marines and sailors like, "Sir, we're on the lookout for the assholes," because nobody wanted to get stuck on the ship.
For sure.
And a lot of the sailors are like, "You know, you kind of talk to us like adults." Well, I'm just telling you the way it is. I don't want to be the Gestapo, but trust me, if we screw this up, I won't secure liberty. The fleet will.
Yeah, this is beyond me at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So fix it yourselves. And we had no issues. Zero.
That's good. I think we mostly had no issues. There were some minor ones. I mean, there's always going to be something, but, you know, the whoring, that wasn't really I didn't really see as much of that as I thought I would, you know, because you always hear about it and you have people like give those speeches like, the prostitutes and this and that. But I know a couple guys, I think I know there was a few people that did go to whorehouses and stuff that I heard about, but it wasn't like a common, as common as I thought it would be. Yeah.
HIV changed the game, because, like, you know, a huge percentage of the prostitutes have HIV, and we told them the infection rate was like 23% or whatever. You're really playing with your life. Don't do it.
Yeah.
You know, and the ESG admiral and I got into it is when we pulled into UAE, and I had a Marine get drunk, and his partner did what he's supposed to do, brought him back to the ship, and the kid puked in the cab. Not a big deal. And the cabbie isn't happy. And they pull up to the pier, and the Marine gets the drunk aboard, tells the officer of the deck, the Marine comes down, sees what happened, gets a gunny, notifies the MEU XO. That's not a CCIR for me, a Marine puking in a cab. My XO will handle it. So what they went out, they got a shop vac, they vacuumed it out, washed it out, paid the cabbie like an extra $100, made the cabbie happy. Everything was taken care of. Well, what happened was the Marine was so drunk, they took him to sick bay and gave him an IV, and the ship's chat. So the ship was like, yeah, this dumb drunk Marine puked in a cab. And so the ESG was monitoring that. And of course, they reported that to the Admiral that a Marine puked in a cab. Well, I haven't been notified. This happened at like 1 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
So I get up to my phone ringing at like 6 a.m. and the Admiral's furious that I hadn't reported an international incident. And I'm like, sir, I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, what do you mean you don't know what you're talking about? I said, well, nobody's bothered me with this. Let me do some research. My XO knew. And he's like, oh, yes, sir. The guy puked. We cleaned out the cab, paid off the cabbie. Everything was fine. And he's like, we didn't think, we should wake you up for that. I'm like, no, you shouldn't. You handled it. That's what Marines do. A gunny and a captain handled it, reported it.
I'd be surprised if the MEU XO even found out,
But the Admiral was calling it international incident. That's and we're on our way home. We're leaving Jebel Ali, heading back to California. And General Tulin, who had 1 MEF at the time, had been my platoon commander at OCS. I've known this guy my entire existence. And the Admiral was chewing my ass. I said, you don't get it, sir. I said, I'm leaving theater. We're getting underway this morning, going home. I said, we have 1 stop left in Hong Kong. And I said, right now, I don't have anybody in the hands of civilian authorities. I haven't lost a Marine or an airplane on this deployment. I've had no sexual assaults or rapes on this deployment. And I've killed bad guys on this deployment. I said, if my luck holds like that, when I tie up in San Diego, I'm going to probably get a wet, sloppy kiss from my general, because usually we break an airplane or kill a Marine or leave somebody in, I haven't had any of those problems. So you're upset that a Marine puked in a cab? My Marines handled it. It's a non-issue. That doesn't rise to my level of concern. I'm worried about wrecking an airplane doing DLQs between here and Hong Kong. That's what I'm worried about, not a Marine puking in a cab. We handled it at the lowest level. Right.
I always look at it like, how would you look at this if you were a tourist? Is that really is that something you'd go to the embassy about? It's not an international, it's something, if I was a tourist in that country, I would just take care of the issue. My bad. I apologize. I'm an asshole. Like you guys, like you said, they did pay them off and then just be on with it, be done with it. But people that want to elevate stuff and make things a huge issue, it's like, what are you doing? You're making trouble when there is none. Like there's no problem here.
Well, it's like being a battalion commander. You have 2 lance corporals getting a fist fight. I get told about it. They're like, well, is there anything you want to do, sir? I'm like, no, that's a gunny problem. I'm not going to ruin a kid's career because they both, found a way to get some beer and got into a fight in the barracks. Mm-hmm. Did they break anything? No, sir. Did anybody get seriously hurt? No, sir. Then sort it out at the lowest level. I don't want to ruin a kid's career over that. Marines are supposed to be aggressive. Mm-hmm. And, when you're a 19-year-old, that's a lot of testosterone, and you're around a lot of other dudes that have a lot of testosterone. As long as they're not breaking shit or hurting each other, some of that's going to happen. You know what I'm talking about. Why do we have to make it a federal case?
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think a lot of enlisted Marines would also agree and say that that's one of the things that drives them to get out of the military is people that want to overblow things or make things a big deal that aren't, make people's lives harder for no reason. It's like, I don't have to put up with this, man. I have other options,
Well, in the late 80s up at Camp Schwab at the officers club on a Friday night, lieutenants were routinely in fist fights because they were drunk. And you know what? The worst case, it ended up with a non-punitive letter of caution, which isn't a part of your record. You got an ash to and maybe an extra duty out of it because you're a 23-year-old lieutenant. You got drunk, got into an argument because somebody went to A&M or whatever the thing was, some ridiculous crap, and their second lieutenants, they got in a fight. Who cares? You're gonna ruin a career because 2 lieutenants got liquored up in Camp Schwab. Nobody was hurt, nothing was broken, so you get a nip lock. Okay, I may or may not have a nip lock or 2. And so when I was raised in that kind of Marine Corps, where there are things you could forgive and things you can't. I can't forgive losing weapons. I can't forgive losing crypto. I can't forgive you if you kill one of your fellow Marines or maim them. Everything else is kind of in the negotiable realm, of what I can do. Now, sexual assault is, zero policy on that. But And I think it should be that, but you know, there are things you can forgive and things you can't, and let the guys handle it at the lowest common denominator. Because, you know, learning can be achieved from that. Not
Yeah.
only for the Marines that made the mistakes, but the young leaders that have to handle the problem. Because I remember reading a memo somewhere that said, my job as a battalion commander or MEU commander is to develop the leadership of the young Marines that work for me. And that isn't always taking a whip to them when they make a mistake. You know, because the worst thing I could do to you, and I learned this early on, if I bring in an officer or an NCO and I yell at them, half the time the guy's sitting there thinking, I should whip this wrinkly old dude's ass. You know, you're not listening. You're just like, who's this asshole yelling at me? But if I called you in and I said, hey, you know, I really think you're a pretty good Marine. And, you know, I don't even want to talk. You disappointed me so much. I have such a high opinion of you, and you disappointed me so much. I'm not going to talk to you right now. Let me calm down. I'll talk to you later. I just kicked you in the junk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that has more impact than me screaming at you.
100%.
You know, so leadership matters, and it's not one size fits all leadership. You have to tweak yourself based on the rank and the maturity and the type of guy you're dealing with. If you treat everything like a nail and you're a hammer, you're going to break glass.
Yeah.
Because not everything's a nail.
Yeah.
And that's what we get paid for as leaders, whether you're an NCO or an officer, is to be able to use some judgment and figure out, how do I reach this guy? How do I make a difference with this guy? If I don't have to execute him and send him to a court-martial office hours, how do I get his attention?
Yeah, it's tough sometimes. It's a tricky game to play, because you're literally messing with people's lives, you know. Yeah. And there's nothing they can do. It's not like it's not a normal job. It's not like you can just fire a guy and be like, all right, you know, thanks for coming, see you later. To get a guy kicked out of the military because of issues is a big deal, and it takes a lot, you know, if it's worthy of that. If it's someone that's causing that kind of I don't know, kind of issues around, which I only saw a few times. You know, people were just absolutely against doing anything that they were told. You know, it was just like complete rejection of everything. You know, getting them to come in their uniform was like that was about all you were going to get out of them. I never had I only had one guy that was kind of like that, and I only had him for a little bit. I came back from a deployment and went back to 210, and we had a dude out of MOS school who was like that and ended up getting kicked out a few months later. But besides that, was really lucky. You know, most of the people I served with were good dudes, and no one really got in trouble, or like, you know, you were talking about, we kept it at the lower levels. Like, if it was in a big deal, don't make it a big deal, you know?
In the vein of like the stupidest thing you saw a Marine do, I was with 2-6 when 9/11 happened. And we were actually at Fort Bragg doing some training. And we came back, and make a long story short, one Saturday, I was mowing the yard. I lived at Camp Lejeune on base. And my wife comes out. I was mowing the yard. She waves the phone. I walk over. It's my duty, a lieutenant. He's like, hey, sir, we had a Marine cut his finger off. And we're medevacing him. And I'm like, oh, shit. All right, I'll be right down. It's like 10 minutes down the road. So I went in, threw on a clean shirt, shorts, drove down to the CP. And I walk in, and literally there's a Marine with Windex or 409 wiping blood off the floor when I walk in. And I'm like, what the hell happened? And the lieutenant's like, sir, I just want to start by saying there's no information in the duty binder about what you do to Marine cuts his finger off. And I'm like, I got it, Lieutenant. What happened? And he's like, well, this Marine we'll refer to as Stumpy from his forward. He's like, Stumpy comes in carrying his finger, and he said he cut his finger off. And, you know, it's me, and I have a driver and an A duty. And I was kind of shocked because he's holding his finger. And he's like, I said, I immediately turned to my clerk and I said, dial 911, get an ambulance. Good move, right? Lieutenant's thinking. And he's like, don't worry, Marine, we'll get it sewed on. And he turned to his assistant duty and he said, go find some ice and let's put the finger on ice. Again, the lieutenant's thinking. And he's like, we'll take care of it. And the Marine's like, I don't want my finger. And he ran out of the office. So the lieutenant and the sergeant go chasing after him, running through the quad. And as the lieutenant's catching up to him, the Marine throws his finger in the dirt. I swear to God, this happened.
What?
And the sergeant runs over and, you know, picks up the finger and runs back to the CP, and it's black. the finger turned black, and it's his index finger. It's his trigger finger. So he takes the finger and he washes it off with the scuttlebutt, and they find some ice and they put it on ice. Eventually, the lieutenant grabs the guy and brings him back, and they send him to the hospital. But the Marine didn't tell him what happened to his finger. But it looks real sketchy at this point. So I'm like, well, I'm the XO. I got to call the CO, and I tell him what I know. We don't know what happened. We just know the Marine cut his finger off.
Mm-hmm.
So they lifelike this kid up to Raleigh, Durham to try to reattach the finger, and they can't. It's too far gone. So he comes back like a week later, and I know something's sketchy. And so I'm told he's back, and I have the company commander and the first sergeant bring him up. I get my sergeant major, and I bring him into the office. I immediately read him his rights, because this doesn't make sense. If you cut your finger off, you say, like, well, I was trying to do something with my saw. The guy was sketchy about it. So I call him in and read him his rights. And I'm like, will you explain to me what happened to your finger? And he's like, oh, yes, sir, I'll tell you. He's like, I don't want to go to war. I didn't join the Marine Corps to go to war. I just thought I was going to get some benefits and some travel out of it. He's a grunt. He's no 311. He's like, I'm not going to war. I'm just going to die, because that's where we're going, right? We're the next MEU out the door. And he's like, so I tied a string around my finger and drained all the blood out of my trigger finger, went out to my tire of my car and used my K-bar like a fulcrum, and I cut my finger off.
Oh my God.
So he just admitted he's a coward, and he purposely cut his finger off. And I'm like, wow. Okay. I said, will you sign a statement to that effect? He's like, yes, sir. Give him a pen. He wrote out a statement, and he came back in, and I said, all right.
Other hand, sorry.
In the interim, I'm going to tell you, we're probably charging you with Article 134. There may be another one. You can't do that. And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, you can't just, you admitted to cowardice and you damaged yourself to avoid going to war. That's a court-martial offense, probably a special, but I'll turn it over to the lawyers. I said, but I don't understand why you did that. You didn't have to. He's like, well, without a trigger finger, I can't go to war. I said, au contraire, I could still send you out there, just make you carry casualties. You don't have to fight. I can still send you, but don't worry, we're going to court martial you. I said, but it would have been a lot simpler had you just come in and said you were gay, or just said you had a drug problem and smoked some dope. We would have thrown you out either way. Mm-hmm. And you still have your finger. And he was like, really? I didn't have to cut my finger off?
God, dude,
like, no.
What an idiot.
So yeah, we sent him to a special court and smoked him. But like, that was probably the dumbest thing I saw a Marine do.
Damn, that's dumb. There was a that's so one. It's funny you said if you're gay, because then that was the thing, right? If it was like, what was if someone was gay, what was the thing then? Like if someone came to you and were like,
ask him to prove it.
I was going to say, do you have to? You can't make them prove it, right?
No, it's not like I'm going to say, hey, here, I'm going to unzip, prove you're gay. No, we'd take him at his word and throw him out.
And that's just that was just a separation, automatic.
Yep.
Wow, I'm surprised. I'm surprised more people didn't do that. I mean, I think being gay would be better than being doing drugs. I would much rather get out because you claim to be gay than you popped on a piss test, because one's a felony, one's not, right?
Yeah, one's going to keep you from getting a federal job later, and the other isn't.
Yeah, man, that's so crazy though, dude. So when I was with 3-6, we were going to Marja in 2011, and they did Marja in 2010, which was obviously a rough deployment. They were doing the push through the clear of Marja, and when I got there, I was the fires chief. I showed up. I literally got back from Chief's course the day they got back from like 29 Palms and went on pre-deployment leave. So I showed up and nobody knows who I am. And there was a kid there that didn't want to deploy. I think he had done the last deployment, or he had heard about the last deployment and was scared or whatever. And they were like, no, you're going to be on area guard. There was going to be an RBE or main behind element, and there were area guards, for whatever, for the regiment and all that stuff. I get, how it works in the camps or whatever. And at some point, someone told him, like, I think someone told him like, hey, you're going to be guard force. That's what they said. You're going to be guard force. And they were talking about camp guard, like within Camp Lejeune. You know, you're going to be an RBE, so you got to do something while you're there. So you're going to be TAD to go be guard force or whatever. And he was thinking guard force guarding the FOBs and stuff in Afghanistan, because that happens. You know, for those that don't know, they pull groups of Marines. You know, everybody's got to give up a few guys, and now that's your guys that stand post. You know, and that's their deployment. And this guy was so adamant about not going, he ran and jumped off of the second or third deck. And I don't know if he paralyzed himself, but he fucked himself up real good. Didn't kill himself, luckily. But he jumped off and hospitalized himself because he thought he was going to Afghanistan. And the thing was, he wasn't. It's like you just misunderstood what they were telling you. And another dude got a tattoo on his neck of a spider. He thought that would get him out of it. And they're like, no. You're deploying. You're just going to get, you're going to get all the administrative punishment stuff later on. Oh man. That's crazy, dude. It's so weird when you see, did you run into that a lot? I mean, cause you were combat arms, basically the entire time you were in.
No, everybody talks about the 10%, to me, it was more like a 3 or 4% of the guys you spend a lot of your, the legal stuff on. Mm-hmm. Millennials are good war fighters. Everybody likes to bash the millennials. It's kind of the thing. I didn't have any problems with the millennials as war fighters. And what's funny is I think, I'm the last year of the baby boom. I'm a 1964 birth. So I'm a real old guy by today's standards. And we were raised differently. And don't get me wrong, I would have been the same as a millennial had I been raised with an iPhone and iPads and the internet. And, when I was in high school, cable TV came out. So I was raised on 3 channels. You went outside after school and played and got in fights. I went to a redneck high school. Guys had shotguns in the racks of their trucks. Mm-hmm. Nobody went on shooting sprees. And we were a resilient group because you had to socially interact. You had no options for entertainment. There were 3 TV stations that had soap operas in the afternoon when you got home from school. So you played sports and you hunted, fished, and you interacted. And it made my generation more resilient. The millennial, you go through Gen X, and they kind of cross that boundary, where they're starting to get that stuff. But the millennials are raised with all the conveniences and the internet and everything. And how many guys do you think your average Lance Corporal's killed with his thumbs? Right? On war games, on Xbox or whatever, PlayStation. So their mindset and their willingness to fight and kill was never a problem. I think they're a little more brittle emotionally as a group. I don't want to cast wide dispersions on them, but because they were, they got off school, some of those guys, and went home and got on the internet or did whatever, they didn't have the same social experience that I had, where you had to deal with fights and disappointment and people.
Yeah.
That social interaction was a lot different. So I think what happened with the millennials, great war fighters, but they're a little more brittle with regard to PTS. How their generation dealt with the stresses of combat is different because they were socialized differently with people. And dealing with disappointment and setback and things is different for their generation than mine. Mine's not better, it's just different. Mm-hmm. Same with Gen X. Yeah. They're just different. So when you see your buddies get killed or maimed, or you're dealing with some of this stuff, you're just not as well armed emotionally as my generation was. And we weren't as good as the Depression era guys that fought World War II and Korea and Vietnam. They were just hard guys,
Scrappy and they had life, yeah.
Yeah, and my generation was kind of the last of that, into the Gen Xers that were not dealing with as much convenience, for a lack of a better word.
I would probably say that if you're talking about PTSD or PTS, I wouldn't say that we deal with it. Well, we do deal with it differently. I don't think that it's increased. I don't know if it's the lifestyle or kind of upbringing has made it more prevalent, but I think that we can express ourselves in more ways so we know about it more. 1. 2, I also think that some figures about people with PTSD and stuff are inflated, because I think people claim as much as they can when they get out, And there are people that have PTSD, but I think anybody that's ever done a deployment ever can say they had PTSD, because you just went through 7 months of living in a different kind of culture, a different lifestyle than anybody else does, and you come back from it. And you know, it's just, it may not be traumatic, but or whatever, it's going to change you, right?
No, I think you're, you know, when I got to command the Wounded Warrior Regiment at the end of my career,
Mm-hmm.
and we were ramping down combat operations. This was in 2015 to 17 timeframe. And General Neller, who I've known for a long time, I was in his battalion when he was commandant. You know, we had interesting discussions about PTS, and I said, I don't think we have any more or less. I think guys are more readily willing to admit that they have problems. I think a lot of guys are making stuff up too. I had a guy who told me he had PTSD, and I was like, well, were you in Iraq or Afghanistan? He's like, well, I was in Kuwait. And a friend of mine, a guy I went to boot camp with, got killed. What? I can understand there's some trauma and stress to that, but not to the level he was displaying.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've got another Lance Corporal or Corporal whose best friend got his head shot off sitting next to him in a Humvee. I understand. You understand that. That's a hellacious thing to have to experience. That level of trauma compared to you hearing about a guy you knew that got killed. I don't put those things on the same level.
Yeah.
You know, so I think it's become a cottage industry to an extent.
100%.
That some of it was blown out of, but some of the guys really had a hard time. And I saw plenty of combat. And as I tried to explain to them, you know, there's nothing worse than calling the parent of a Marine you lost in battle. Nothing worse than that. You feel like you failed the parent. You know, enemy gets a vote, it doesn't matter, but you still have to deal with the ramifications on the back end of it. But when you look at it in its totality and you say, well, you're going to have to learn to deal with this, because the drugs aren't going to make this problem go away. Alcohol isn't going to make the problem go away. At some point, you have to put on your big boy pants and come to grips with what you saw or what you did. And there's no magic bean for that. You can talk to the shrink. We can send you to talk to the chaplain. We can prescribe you meds for a while. But at some point, you have to embrace this and deal with it, because the alternative is a shitty life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a life of misery. So what do you want? What do you want in your future? You get to decide that. Regardless of what shitty things you saw or had to do, in the end, you have to own it and take responsibility and learn to deal with it. And I'm not saying it's easy, but that's the fact of the matter. I used to have bad dreams all the time. I saw some pretty awful things. And when I got out, when I was retiring, I'd never seen the wizard, you know, and my regimental surgeon's like, sir, your body's pretty, I've had like 10 surgeries putting me back together. And he's like, you know, you need to go see the wizard. You saw a lot of combat. And I said, I don't really have a big problem with it. And he's like, no, but you might in the future. And if it's not in your record, the VA ain't going to treat you. So go see the wizard. So I went and saw a really nice lieutenant here at Quantico, and you know, they had the mood lighting and the incense burning. It was kind of cliche. And she's like, I see you saw a lot of combat. And I said, yeah, I saw my share. And she was like, and I assume you had to kill people. And I said, yeah, I had to do some of that. And she's like, and that bothers you? I'm like, no. I said, what bothers me is zipping up a body bag on a Marine, or seeing a woman and child that was hit by friendly fire or enemy fire. Those are the things that bother me. The enemy got a vote. I got a vote. We signed up for it. That part of it didn't really bother me. But seeing a young Marine with his leg ripped off, yeah, that bothers me. Mm-hmm. You know, knowing that at home there's a family that doesn't know yet that their whole world has been altered because their son was, you know, incinerated in a Humvee in Iraq. That's what kept me up at night. Those are the things that I saw that bothered me, not the fighting. It was seeing the aftermath of the Marines that I was privileged enough to lead. And she laughed. I said, does that make me a psycho? And she was like, no, I had mild PTSD, and I used to have a couple of dreams a week. And big surprise, I've been out 7 years. I haven't seen combat in 15, you know, direct fire combat since like 2006. Hell, it's almost 17 years. The dreams are far, you know, bigger gaps between having them. You still have them every now and then. It's never going to go away, but you learn to deal with it. And time's your friend, as long as you don't abuse alcohol and drugs and do things that set you back. But to a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old, telling them not to drink, because that's an expedient problem solver today to help them sleep, they don't understand that when you're 30, that's going to be a huge problem for you.
Yeah.
So you
for
better
sure.
deal with it now while you're 20 or 21, instead of kicking the can down the road, drinking at night to deal with the problem.
Was it tough to be the CEO of the, seeing the guys at the Wounded Warriors that's like, one of the injuries that you're seeing?
Oh, it was a factory of sadness. Worst job I ever had. I love being a CEO. It was a great way to go out. I had a view of the regiment, which is nice. I buried, I think, 18 Marines or 17 Marines and one civilian in a little over 2 years as a CO. Cancer got most of them. I had no idea that we had so many terminally ill Marines, but we buried a Marine about every 5 or 6 weeks in that job.
From cancer, really?
Oh, God. Yeah. When I took over, I don't know if you heard about Shane Tomko. Shane Tomko got relieved for sexual assault and harassment. And I got summoned to General Dunford's office on a Friday. Thursday night, his EA called me and said, hey, and I worked for Dunford at 1MEF for a little while, so he knew me. And he's like, General Dunford wants to see you in his office tomorrow morning at 08. And I'm the chief of staff at EDCOM waiting to take over the Marine War College. And I'm like, am I in trouble? And he's like, have you done something wrong? Not that I'm going to admit to. Yeah. He's like, no, he wants to interview you for a job. And I'm like, all right. It's like 8 at night. My wife's like, who's that? I said, Commandant wants to see me tomorrow, which ain't a normal thing for a colonel, getting summons to see the Dunford. And I'm like, okay. So I put on my Charlies and went up there. And of course, he was late. He was in the tank or something. And he came in and he's like, hey, Scott, come on in. He's like, do you know why you're here? I said, I understand I'm getting a job interview for something, sir. And he's like, no, you got the job. I need you to take over Wounded Warrior Regiment. I had to fire Shane Tomko. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, you got any questions? And I'm like, well, when do I start? And he's like, how quick can you get back to Quantico? I said, I got it. Okay. Do you have any guidance? And he's like, well, you got to clean up the mess Tomko left. And I need you to put us on the right footing for peacetime because we're down ramping operations. I need you to right size the regiment. And I need you to put some discipline in that mob because there's not a lot of discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay. And I literally drove back. I said, who's going to tell my boss? He's like, I'll have the ACMAC call your general. So by the time I got back to Quantico, they'd literally packed up my office. I didn't have that much in there. And I went over and took over the regiment and walked in. And the XO looked up and he's like, can I help you? I said, I'm the new CO. And he's like, oh, come on in. And he's like, where do you want to start? And I said, I want you to get the supply officer. We have a supply officer. He's like, yes, sir. I said, I need the supply officer to bring me a can of compassion because the Marine Corps didn't issue me that shit. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to take care of people. I break people. So I began the education of how you deal with a population where any given time we had 300 or so guys in the regiment, patients, and probably 85% of them I'm going to medically discharge. And certain statistics like, well, how many cancer guys do I have? Well, we don't really, we could tell you, but we don't, it's not a stat that we usually publish. I said, I want to know how many PTS guys I have because I don't know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, what's my population? How many are combat wounded? How many are PTS? Because we have a huge mental issue. We have a lot of mental. I said, how many are cancer or other issues? I want to see the demographics. And then my sergeant major and I, about 2 weeks later, went up to Bethesda. And we have a outbuilding where we have a floor where wounded, we have a detachment there. Lieutenant Colonel Reservist ran for us. And I was going down to meet him for the first time and get a brief. And there's a Starbucks on the first floor. And I'm like, hey, Sergeant Major, let's buy a cup of coffee. I'll buy. And I look over and there are 3 Marines sitting at a table. And I'm like, well, they either work for me or they're patients, right? So let's go introduce ourselves. And most people don't want to talk to a colonel.
Yeah.
It's almost like you have, a horn growing out of your forehead or something. But I went over and I said, hey, Marines, are you in the Wounded Warrior Regiment? And they're like, oh, yes, sir, we're patients. I said, can we talk for a minute? So we sat down and I'm like, what's your name? Where are you from? And I said, why are you here? And the first Marine said, I have terminal brain cancer. It's non-operable. They've tried shrinking it with radiation. I'm on chemo, but it's not working. And I'm like, oh my God, what's your timeline? And he's like, they think I've got 3 or 4 months. I buried that kid 90 days later. Dude, and then the girl sitting next to him, the female, she said, they don't know what's wrong with me. My organs are shutting down. I buried her 9 months later. 2 of the 3 Marines I met my first 2 weeks in the regiment, there were patients I buried. Like, what the fuck? And we would, and you know, I was real proud of the regiment. It did stuff like when you went into hospice, you know, the family can't be there 24 hours a day. And we didn't want a Marine to die alone. I get choked up. The Marines volunteered to go at night and sit with the Marines. So the kid's dying, the parents have to go home. They're terrified he's going to die at night. I had Marines volunteer to sit by the bedside with those Marines while they died. Just heartbreaking.
That's crazy, man.
Heartbreaking.
That's tough, dude. That's
yeah. I get emotional about it because I never thought I'd.
How could you not?
Many Marines.
How could you?
And then
not?
I had a woman murdered. This was crazy. I'll leave the names out of it. People could look it up. This is in probably 2016 or 15. I had one of my female psych, I think nurses, was murdered by her husband. And they'd been having a problem. She was supposed to go out to dinner with a girlfriend. They had a fight. He kills her. The son E&E's out the window and goes to the neighbor's house. This made national news. So they dial 911. 2 cops, I think it's in Fairfax, show up. And it's a female cop and a veteran cop. The female cop, it's her first call ever. She's a former Marine. They walk up on the porch and the asshole shoots through the door and kills a female cop. Her first call. And, you know, I get that call at like 2200 at night that we lost this young gal to some asshole husband that blew her away and then killed a cop who was a former Marine.
Yeah. That was
just,
yeah. I think
that was a factory of sadness. And now they don't have any wounded, but they have a hell of a lot of psych cases over there. I've stopped and introduced myself to the new CO, and probably 60% of their population is psychological. They still have the car crashes and motorcycles and, you know, training accidents, but the vast majority of the population over there is mental.
It's an unpopular thing to talk about, but how many of those people do you think are scammers? Because there are people that are over there that work the system and they talk to each other and they tell each other, hey, say this and you'll get this, do this. People that don't know, I had an inside perspective to it, to like some of the stuff that happens there. Patients can get iPads if there's certain things wrong with them, and certain organizations are working with them. There's organizations that give, there's organizations that are just trying to help and giving away so much free stuff. And
well, there without a doubt, there's an element of fraud that goes on. I was kind of horrified. When I retired, I was 360% disabled. If you added it all up, I had a free fall accident and fractured some vertebrae in my lower back. In fact, I was retired and retained because I wouldn't get the surgeries because I was a regimental commander. My plan was to do this when I was at running the war college because it's not as important, you know, but now I'm a regimental CO. I couldn't take the time off to get the surgery. I had 2 titanium rods, 5 discs and 10 screws put in my lower back. I had a plate put in my neck. I've had my left shoulder replaced. You know, I've had a lot of surgeries putting me back together. But, you know, when you look at the totality of that, the number one thing they gave me disability for was sleep apnea.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I got 50% for that. I can't stand up straight because of my lower back. I only got 40% for my back. And I thought that was the most, well, you can't fake that because they have to hook you to a machine. And I had, you know, mild to severe sleep apnea, which that's the least of my problems. You know, my knees are shot, my hips. I've had so many different problems. But then you see guys come in and they're like, well, I have PTSD. Okay, well, how does that manifest? Well, I have TBI. Well, we can test for that, you know. And they're trying to nickel and dime the system because they talk to each other, and you can tell pretty quick when the guys are full of crap, you know, because like, how do you fake your hearing loss? Because you got to go in and push the button, you know, and you can just not push the button, which isn't realistic either because we can talk. I know you can hear. So you know, okay, you get 15% because you lost some hearing. You got 15% because you got TBI. You got 10% for your scars. You know, and the way they are you familiar with the VA math?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not fully, but yeah, I got a
Well,
percentage when I got out.
yeah. Well, what happens is they say, okay, like I'm 50% because of sleep apnea. So you say, okay, well, you're 40% for your back, you're 90% disabled. No, what they do is that next 40% is 40% of the 50% that you're considered whole. Because when they say you're 50% disabled, then they look at the other 50% like it's a whole. So when you add 40% into it, it's 40% of 50.
Gotcha.
And then you get 20% for your neck. So it's 20% of that. And then once you get above 90, they kind of throw in the towel and give you 100%. But that's how they do the math. So kids are actually sitting there with their pencil trying to figure out how much they're going to get. You know, not all of them. There's plenty of guys that are legitimately messed up, but
can you do anything? Are there any options or tools for you when you go, man, I don't think this guy's I think he's just working the system here. You know, I mean, or is it politically unfavorable to like talk about or accuse someone?
Well, it's not my problem. It's the VA's problem because, you know, we would look at, I had a lieutenant colonel that this actually happened, who got hit in the head with a pallet in Afghanistan, collapsed his skull.
Shit.
They thought he was going to die. They flew the family to Germany. He lived. They bring him to Bethesda. I was driving up to my in-laws in Ohio, and we stopped in at Bethesda. I went in to see him. He'd been there about a week, and I went up to see him. And I walked in, and his mom and his wife were in there, and the porch light's on, and nobody's home. He's like drooling. His eyes are vacant. They'd taken the chunk of his skull and put it in his stomach to let his brain expand. Because I mean, it was awful. And I was choked up walking out of there because, like, he's never going to be right, clearly, but he's alive. And I went up to visit him several times, and he was having behavioral issues. We transferred him to Richmond, to the VA in Richmond. And in fact, we got a nurse fired because she duct taped him to the chair and slapped him. It was a mess. I had to call the commandant on that one and go see the administrator of the hospital. It was awful.
But
crazy. Eventually he gets to the point, and this happened early when I took over the regiment. Jump ahead like 19 months. He's finally discharged from the VA. And every time I went, I probably saw him a half dozen times or more. He was talking better, but he was slow. Like where you and I are having this conversation, it would take him a minute to very slowly enunciate. So I go up to see him. He's getting discharged, and he gets discharged on a Friday. He shows up at Wounded Warrior Regiment on Monday. This is the spirit of Marines. They'll put a lump in your throat. This lieutenant colonel, who walks very slow and can't talk right, reported for duty. And he didn't understand. Like, your job now is to go to physical therapy and occupational therapy and to get yourself right. I didn't have a desk for him. I'm not going to employ the guy, but I didn't want to tell him that because he was all motivated. And his wife looked at me, like gave me the knowing look. And I'm like, hey, welcome. So glad you're here. I said, look, we're going to ease you into this. I want you to reintegrate with your family at home. He lived in Fredericksburg. I want you to take a couple of weeks or months to reintegrate with the family and go to PT and your occupational stuff. And when you're ready and all that's kind of sorted out, we'll sort you out. I said, XO, go give him a tour. And when he left, I looked at his wife, and she's like, he doesn't understand. He's never going to be right. Well, they were trying to discharge him at 80%. And I called the commandant, and I was like, this is bullshit. Anybody that sees this guy knows he's never going to be right. And the commandant ended up talking to the head of the VA, and we got him reevaluated, and he ended up getting 100%. But
what the hell was the evaluator thinking? You know,
well, the problem is you're just a piece of paper.
Yeah, that's true.
The evaluator that's actually looking at all the paperwork, making the final stipulations, never seen the guy. And
yeah, but if you say, hey, part of your skull was removed and your brain, you know, like.
Well, they eventually took it out of the stomach and put it back in, but, you know, he was clearly never going to be right. Yeah, he's never going to be a fully functioning member of society.
That's
but some bureaucrat thought that was okay. Now, fortunately, my job, I could call the commandant or the ACMAC when I had real egregious crap like that. That was one of the best parts of that job because you're a one-off job. But yeah, that guy clearly wasn't faking. And, the VA wasn't going to give him his 100%.
That's crazy. Yeah, that the whole VA rating system and stuff like that, it just feels gross sometimes when you talk to people about it. Because some people are like, do whatever you can to get 100%. You know, I know guys that got lawyers and stuff when they got out because they're like, yeah, I'll just go get a lawyer and this guy specializes in it. I pay him this much and then he takes care of it for me. And it's like, okay. I mean, but then I'm
Well,
like, and then I'm on the side of like, I don't need it. I don't want to clog up the system. You know, if something's messed up, I want it to be documented and taken care of, obviously, but I'm not trying to needlessly throw stuff out there.
most guys are like you. They're just, hey, I legitimately got messed up. I want to get compensated for it. You fill out your form and let it ride. You know, occasionally guys get over on the system, and then some guys get screwed. You know, they
There was
lowball them.
there was a guy recently that, yeah, that happens too sometimes. There was a guy recently that just went to prison because or I think he's going to prison or something like that because he was scamming the VA, saying that he was 100% disabled. He supposedly didn't have mobility and all this stuff. But then you got on his social media and he's like a weightlifter and like a power
That's what we
lifter.
run in triathlons. And yeah.
It's like, dude, I think and he was getting
It's
like
no
a
different
ton
than
of money.
workers' compensation fraud.
Yeah, it's so crazy, man. It's such a scummy part of it. It's like, man, you hate to think that people your fellow service members and supposed to be like super good people are out there like scamming the system, but there's people that are like, hey, you deserve it. You did your time, and no matter what, you should get that. And I don't know. I can kind of see some people's arguments where I see both sides sometimes, but it just feels weird. And I know guys too that have gotten out and didn't claim anything because they didn't want to take anything from the system at all. They're like, I
Yeah.
don't want to clog up the system because there's guys that really need help. And it's like, dude, you got to go in and at least tell them about your issues because if you don't, you're fucked later on if
I,
something happens.
well, as scummy as some of these stories are, and I can tell you some bad ones, there's some real inspirational ones. Not long after I took over, I went down and they have what's called the mats at Bethesda where the amputees exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And these two guys, and they were from 2nd Marines, I think. They'd been wounded about a month apart, both lost a leg, one above the knee, one below the knee. And they'd been there, I don't know, a couple of months, 6, 8 weeks. They hadn't got their fancy complex legs yet. They're still walking on like stick legs. And um, I went down to the mats to check it out to see what that was like. And these two Marines are in there and they're friends. One's like a corporal and a lance corporal. They were in different companies. They knew each other, but they weren't buddies in like 3-2, but they become really good friends because they were from the same unit and had similar injuries. And after they got done, I said, hey, can I guys buy you lunch or a cup of coffee? I'd really like to talk to you and learn about your experience. I'm the CO. I want to make this better. I need to know about what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And they're like, yeah, if the colonel's buying, we're eating, so they put on their legs and off we go. And they're on crutches. And, I don't want to be an asshole and walk in front of them. So I'm kind of walking behind the two as we walk down to get some chow. And the guy with the above the knee amputee is clearly moving a little slower than the below the knee guy. And the below the knee guy, I wish I could remember their names, turns to the guy with the above the knee amputee and he's like, would you hurry the fuck up? I'm hungry. And the guy with the above the knee injury said, look, bitch, I don't have a paper cut like you. This is actually a problem. But watching them engage showed me the wisdom of the Wounded Warrior Regiment because they both were going through a pretty traumatic, awful thing. Their lives were forever changed, but they had the resiliency to fuck with each other and
Yeah.
to push each other. And they joked about, like, one guy had a size 10 and the other guy had a size 9 shoe, and they had opposite legs. And they're like, well, if this asshole would have grown an extra inch, we could have shared shoes, But the whole dynamic of them coming to grips with their reality and going through that experience with a fellow Marine, and it turned out they were from the same battalion, which made it better for them. But it really gave me a lot of hope,
For
and
sure.
motivated me to say, hey, these guys aren't down. I had another guy who he was one of the last amputees out of Afghanistan. He was a staff sergeant, grunt. And when I went to see him, first thing he said to me, he's like, you're not going to throw me out of the Marine Corps, are you, sir? And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We make accommodations for amputees. We kept many of them that wanted to stay. I'm like, hey, we're way too early to talk about that. But if you want to stay, we'll make that happen. But
Mm-hmm.
now's not the time. You got a colostomy bag, you're missing a leg. Let's get you further down the pipeline and we'll reevaluate it. He's like, well, my dad's a retired CWO, whatever, and I really want to stick around and retire. And I'm like, look, Marine, if that's what you want, we can make that happen. But you're never going to be a grunt again. Well, your injury, we're gonna put you in comm electronics or admin, or your days of leading Marines in combat are over.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll keep you if that's what you want to do. But I think you're being a little premature, because you're probably going to be 100% disabled. We'll retire you. You'll get 100% disability. You got the GI Bill. You're obviously motivated and a good leader. You're going to get a degree on the GI Bill. You'll get a job probably starting at $50,000 or $60,000 a year. You get $40,000 from the VA. You're going to be making $100K or more a year in 5 or 6 years. Or you could be a gunny. Nothing wrong with that, if that's what you want to do, but you'll be at home every night with your wife. You had 2 sons, you'll make 6 figures, or you can be working for gunny pay. Maybe you ought to take a knee and face outboard, think about it, and talk to your old lady before we start making decisions like that.
Yeah.
And he's like, I got it, sir, but I want to stay. About 9 months later, I saw him at an event. He's like, sir, I'm getting out.
I'm out of here.
He's like, I love the Corps, but I said, you could probably even stay in the reserves if you were that motivated. But you've got a whole nother chapter of your life. It doesn't have to be the Corps. The Corps is never going to love you back. You and I both know that.
Yeah, unfortunately. I think that's the life lesson everybody's got to learn when they get out, or when they start making that decision if they want to stay in or get out. Like if they're letting down the Marine Corps by not doing one, by not staying in or whatever. And it's like, dude, the military, the Marine Corps is one big machine, man, and it's going to keep on going. Doesn't matter. You had your impact while you're there or whatever, but once you're gone, and the machine's going to keep going. And so you got to really consider what's best for you.
What did you take away from it besides the experiences, the friendships, right?
Yeah.
If I'm betting you have some buddies that are like brothers to you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's like, I've always said, you meet so many people from so many different backgrounds, the diversity of thought, of just everything, and being not only that, but as you get older, I was in for 12 years. As you get older, you're still around a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds all the time. So you're always up to date on new stuff, new technologies, new songs, new everything like that. It's just like it's an environment that keeps you youthful, I think, because you're keeping up with all kinds of stuff like that. So it feels, when you get out, you really have, and I tell this to people all the time, like, you got to find something you're passionate about. You got to find, it doesn't have to be a job. It could be a hobby. You got to find something though that you care about, because if you don't, man, I mean, that's what it's all about, is caring about something. If you just get out and drink and dwell on the good old days back in the Corps, it's probably not going to end well. It's like, you got to find something that you really enjoy, like you said, turn that page, the next chapter of your life, and do the next most awesome thing you've ever wanted to do. And I really wish guys understood the benefits that they have more, and understand, like, the GI Bill. Guys are like, I would never go to college, I wouldn't use that, like, I don't need to go and get indoctrinated or whatever. It's like, dude, you can use it to go to like technical schools.
Welding school.
Yeah. You can go to Wyotech and go, learn how to do whatever, like, use it for whatever it is you ever wanted to be, other than a Marine now. Whatever it is, like, think about it. Like, what is it I ever wanted to be? I want to be a sound engineer for some music studio in Los Angeles. Well, how do I do that? Well, first I need to learn how to, work with the equipment, use my GI Bill, or use my,
exactly.
What's the other one called? There's another thing too. I can't remember what it's called. But you know what I'm saying? Like, use these benefits and use your network of veterans, of Marines and stuff like that to, I don't know, chart these paths for you, these awesome opportunities and stuff. So I don't know. It feels like that's probably a good place to start wrapping it up. Do you want to say something?
The medals and the adventures and all that's great.
Yeah.
But the thing my XO when I went to Anglico was a guy named John O'Neill. We did 2 deployments to Iraq together. As a MEU commander, I had to have a pilot XO. I called John O'Neill and got him to be my XO at the MEU. And he got to fly the Frog one last time. My fast platoon, we have a reunion. We're having our 30th anniversary of Black Hawk Down this year. And we meet up in Ohio. Those guys get together every year. Those friendships I value. And it's funny, I was the captain, I was the skipper, the only officer. And getting back together and hearing all the stories about what went on behind the scenes, the shit the captain didn't get to know.
Yeah.
And I knew these guys as Lance Corporals, Fight Master and DeZinzel and all these guys that were 19, 20-year-old Lance Corporals. Now they're 50-year-old men. with pensions and divorces and, and they're
Lives,
chubby
yeah.
and gray like I am. But 30 years we've been friends. And those things you can never replicate. In most civilians, you can't replicate that. That's what I cherish most about my service are those handful of friendships that have endured. And it's God, it's special, isn't it?
Oh yeah,
It
man. The memories, looking back and laughing at stupid stuff that no one would ever understand why you're laughing about it, you know?
oh yeah.
Looking back fondly upon memories that were at the time like shared misery, you know,
Oh
but you
yeah.
wouldn't change it now. You wouldn't be like, I wouldn't want to go through that, you know, even if it was like horrible event or whatever. It's like being frozen in 29 Palms in November on an OP at 3 in the morning, you know?
Yeah.
It's
And
like
getting snowed on in 29 Palms. Who thought that would happen?
it's been, yeah, it's stuff like that. It's just it's the opportunity to taking people out of these small towns in the United States from all over the place and giving them the opportunity to go do things that they'll never be able to do again, or people from their town will never have done, like, I mean, just even the basic stuff of like going to boot camp, which is cheesy as it sounds, and we all did it because we're all Marines, but how many people have gone and rappelled down a tower? How many people have gone into a gas chamber with a gas mask on? You know how many civilian dudes would be like, "Fuck yes, I mean, like I'd pay to do that." And we get these opportunities. It's stupid. It's so stupid, and I don't think I would want to go do it for fun right now. But it's like all these weird experiences, these going overseas to different ports and seeing different cultures and trying not to get HIV from prostitutes. Like
Yeah.
it's
And
funny.
all the deployments I did to Iraq and different places, I never saw a Marine do anything cowardice. I
No,
saw Marines that were scared, but I never saw a Marine do something where I was like, that's cowardice bullshit right there. Never. I saw
yeah,
plenty of scared Marines get into Humvees when they were blowing up every week in Iraq. And you could tell they were scared, but you know what? That kid got in the Humvee and went to his job.
yeah,
And
for sure.
God, it inspired me that I got to lead guys like that, you know, and I reminded myself of that every day. I get to lead these guys. I got to be worthy of them because I know that 19-year, I'm scared and I'm trying to act like I'm not because I'm a CO,
Yeah,
yeah, we're going to go kick some ass today. And, my ass is trying to suck the Humvee up inside it too. We sit down and you look at that 19-year-old driver that's like, but he got in and did his job.
for
And
sure.
memories like that, they were worth the price of admission getting to work with guys like that.
100%, man. Yeah.
Yep.
Scott, it's been a great conversation. Did you want to plug your social media or anything like that?
Well, I had the great fortune. It's another story for another time of getting hooked up with American Humane, which is the oldest humane organization. And you think, like, well, why is a Marine hooked up with them? They save animals, but they have a thing called Pups for Patriots. They're very into the veterans. And one of the things they do is train service dogs for service members with PTS. And they have sanctuaries, and they don't just go by puppy mills and buy dogs. They actually go to kill centers and try to rescue puppies of the right breeds that they could train to do this. So it's a two for, they save dogs and they train them to help veterans with PTS. So I'm real proud of that association, the Pups for Patriots program. Robin Ganser, our CEO, is magnificent. And, she loves veterans and puppies, and animals. You can't ask for somebody better to work with. So I tell people to be aware that most people don't know American Humane does all this. Like if you go to a movie that has animals in it, at the end of it, it'll say, no animals were hurt in the filming of this. American Humane puts the people on the movie sets and does that. So it's really a worthy organization. I never thought I'd get to do philanthropy, but I enjoy that. And it's important that, if you care about veterans and dogs, American Humane's a place you could donate a few bucks to help get a dog, because I never saw a Marine kill himself that had a leash in his hand. The
Yeah.
suicides I had at the regiment weren't guys with service dogs.
Dogs are awesome. I mean, I'm looking at mine right now. He's, like I said, before we started, he's 16 and coming to the end, I think, but it's tough to see it, but 16 years of friendship, of everything, coming home from deployments and he'd come running at me and stuff like that. It's a special bond, really. I love dogs, so I'm glad you put that out there. Yeah, man. Everybody check that out. Make sure to look at my stuff. jkramergraphics.com is my website. Former Action Guys, Former Action News, both of those on Instagram. And that's it, man. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure being here.